Hey, folks. Hey. Hola. Hey, everybody. It's been a little while since I have gone live on the Black Food Folks account, and I am super excited for today. Waiting for some folks to join in. Today, I'm going to be talking with Chef Simeon Hall. He's a really brilliant Bahamian chef by way of actually Hawaii right now. So really excited to talk the Caribbean, talk the Rona, talk everything with a chef I'm really excited about. So hold on, let's see. We're waiting for Chef Simeon. And definitely stay tuned after this conversation at 4. Jackie Summers is coming back with his Friday happy hour, and it's going to be talking with Zan Kong, so it's going to be really dope. We're going to keep it very tight and be on time for a 3:55-ish in, but here we go. I see Chef Simeon. Let's see. Hey, Chef.
Aloha. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Aloha to you as well.
I'm good. I'm starstruck right now.
What? Anyway, I was when Clay asked me to talk with you for this. I was realizing it was 3 years since we met in Tortola. Erica Davis,
Right.
Erica Klein, actually. A really wonderful who is responsible for Culinary Wonders and thinking a lot about community building for the last, really all her career, but certainly very intentionally over the last 12, 13 years. Used to do these events called the Minority Chef Summit. And I think the sort of fruition, the highest level of it was when we were all in Tortola, May of 2017 before the storms. And it was so interesting to meet you and other chefs who were making their lives in the Caribbean, to have this kind of transatlantic, global kind of conversation, because it felt very much like we were all showing up with our sort of disparate experiences, but we all had this really common narrative around sort of navigating our identity through our practice, and it was really happening in this kinetic way in this very particular moment. So watching you guys work and hearing you speak was really impactful. So I'm glad to get to chat with you.
Awesome. I'm just trying to get my audio turned up.
Is it okay?
I would be good to go.
Okay. So for those of you who aren't familiar, I would love it if Chef Simeon could just talk a little bit about like your background. I know you're from the Bahamas, but talk a little bit about what that really means. Because I think that we romanticize the Caribbean in a way, but don't really have a full understanding about what that kind of fully Black life is like.
Well, yes. First of all, thanks again for chatting with me. I like I said, I'm starstruck because I think what you've been doing in terms of capturing our voice and putting it on paper is very important. There's so much to be said around our culture. And because I know we have a very limited time, I'll dive into it. There's so many things, and there's a resurgence because, over the years, I feel as though the Caribbean has kind of been put into a big common ball, and it's so distinct. People still think the Caribbean is Jamaica. People still think the Caribbean is Trinidad Carnival. People still think, the Caribbean is Rihanna, and it's so much more than that, And places like the Bahamas, even though we are known as a destination, a tourist destination, we've often been left out of the food conversation.
Yeah.
And, persons like myself are working hard to make sure that we're included, especially based on the fact that history reveals that the Bahamas was the place that your friend, Mr. Columbus, landed and then started the process. And started the process of putting everything together, especially from a culinary standpoint. You know, a lot of things and a lot of connections are being made. For example, the Geechee Gullah connection with the Bahamas. Bahamians and Geechee are almost the same. When you look at people like DJ, Dennis doing his food, and then I compare that to me doing my food, they're almost one and the same. And so the conversation and being a part of the conversation is definitely something that I think we need to be included in so that we all understand our connections. And that route, that journey that was taken to bring the slaves and all of that, touched through the Caribbean, the influence of the indigenous Tino people and everything else is so relevant. You can't talk about, you know, soul food is my niece or my nephew.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We the uncle. So we need to definitely be included in that conversation in a way that is a little bit more enlightening for those people who don't understand. You know what I mean? Places like Haiti, where the roots of barbecue began, is definitely very, very important. You know what I mean? Yeah. Understanding that cook-up or pilau or rice and peas or these braised rice, you know, the Bahamas is definitely a big part of that. We were the ones that were doing that from the onset. You had a question?
So, no, because I want to pause there and sort of put a pin, because I think that takes me back to something I really wanted to get into with you about the mechanism of tourism and the effect of it on the Caribbean. I think so much about our time in Tortola, but certainly thinking about folks like you, folks like Neil and Erica, who were doing work, especially in the like sort of space of culinary education, in these islands where, to your point, there's this sense that the realities of the deep-rooted heritage that kind of infuses every dish, right? The sort of food that is in the marrow of your bones is not necessarily, it doesn't have pride of place in the imagination of tourists, right? It doesn't have pride of place in the imagination of the rest of the world's gaze onto the Caribbean. So I'm wondering about what that looks like from a practitioner standpoint of being, because I mean, you work as the culinary ambassador for the Bahamas. You are thinking a lot about the effect of tourism and the mechanism of tourism and how you have to play a role in it. But I'm wondering about this awakening you're talking about, because there seems to be this moment of reckoning where we recognize the fusion of culture through the lens of tourism, but the necessity of it for the financial mechanism that you operate in. How do you can't divorce tourism from the spaces in which the way you live, the way your country works. But I think that is there not some ways in which that changes or shifts the posture of the work?
Well, tourism for any country is always going to be bittersweet. Yeah. It comes with its highs and it comes with its lows. From a food point of view, it's the same thing. Okay. You know, pound for pound, we have more non-Bahamian restaurants and eatery across the length and breadth of the Bahamas than we do Bahamian restaurants. You know, a Bahamian corner on a buffet in a hotel is a lot. Not a Bahamian-based or themed or concepted restaurant. A little corner. If you get that, you're making some strides. So one of the issues that I had several years ago when I did a lot of my ambassador work for culinary tourism was coming to the point where I realized where guests would often come to us. When we go to these events, we always showcase Bahamian. We always showcase the Caribbean. I mean, everything. You put it together, we do it. And we do it very big. And then the question is often asked, when we come to the island, where do we get this experience? Here I am, looking the guests in their face and realizing, nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. This is something that we put on so that we can get you there. But when you actually get there, we don't have this to deliver to you. And that's a huge problem. And so my fight intensified to that point to make sure that people have what we all deem and realize is a sense of place. What's the sense being in the Bahamas if you could literally take that experience and drop it in Miami or anywhere else? It doesn't make sense. Even another Caribbean island. The Bahamas has one of the things that we've always been very proud of is our location and the fact that we are a chain of islands. And each island has its own identity.
Yes.
You know what I mean? I fight with my colleagues all the time when people call a restaurant a Bahamian restaurant and it only features food from one island. That's not a Bahamian restaurant. That's that island's interpretation of Bahamian food. Because food in Freeport is totally different than food in Andros or food in Inagua. It's the same thing like the U.S. Southern cuisine, Californian cuisine, Northern cuisine, they all have their own identity. And so that's definitely something that we want to make sure that when somebody visits our islands, they definitely get that taste of the island. So you'll see me using those kinds of hashtags. You'll see me promoting that all the time so that people actually get a true sense of place. Now, coming out of Corona, anybody who doesn't put forth a more authentic experience for anybody visiting their island or their place or their destination or even their house, you can lose out. You can absolutely lose out. When I come to an Airbnb in the Bahamas, I want it to feel like I'm in the Bahamas, unless I ain't coming back. If it's a nice feel, if I could open the windows and turn off the AC, and I get that sea breeze coming in, and you know, the way that you have the place laid out and everything else, the next time I come, I want to stay at that same exact place. If I go to New York, but I feel I want that city experience. Yeah. I don't want to feel like I'm back on one of the islands. So all of that really, really needs to be a part of what it is that we're looking forward to. And so, you know, I've been in a lot of conversations lately, especially during this time when everybody was forced to pause. Yeah. To realize that moving forward, authentic is what everybody is going to look for. Authentic is what everybody is going to be drawn to, 110%. And so food needs to be, you know, highlighted in a way that we all can appreciate and get a taste of where we are. And food is a major component of culture. If I don't taste you, we ain't connected. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I guess I want to circle back then to them about rigor, because I think about people like Vernon Grosvenor. I think about people like Anna Lewis. I think about people like, there's this sort of long line of folks who've been sort of writing and thinking about the extraction of culture, especially Black culture, excuse me, through the lens of food. And so I think it would be short-sighted to sort of pretend or sort of to sort of talk about this moment as particularly singular, because I think that we see the arc of this kind of awakening happen constantly throughout history. I think that it's a matter of like sort of where the zeitgeist is at any given time. But I guess I'm wondering about the rigor of knowing your culture through the lens of food for real. Because to your point, like you make the really interesting point that you can travel all throughout the Bahamas and in terms of the way people are dining in their homes, dining outside of the restaurant space. You feel and taste specificity. You talking about regionality, talking about ingredients that are and techniques that are specific to the particular island. But if that's not perpetuated in the rigor of culinary practice, then how are you expecting, or how are we really honestly expecting that to translate into the gastronomic space, right? Like, what does that look like in culinary schools in Bahamas? What does that look like? Like, I wonder about what the practical rigor of teaching those techniques, teaching those that regional specificity looks like in a moment where folks are just getting to the place where they're willing to acknowledge or honor the specificity and what they may be tasting when they're on vacation or thinking about a place that they maybe have never been.
Well, again, persons like myself and similar-minded people have to continue to push and lead the charge. It definitely is something that, myself, when I get a hold of young chefs coming into the industry, it definitely is something that I put on their plate to let them know and appreciate. Because the moment, when you think about it, when you're a young culinarian coming in, for example, you look up to the chefs in the industry, and pretty much whatever they guide you into is what you believe. And so, if we're not the ones that are helping to lead that charge to say, okay, youngster, here's molecular gastronomy, and here's cooking outside on a fire stove, on a tree rock stove.
Yeah.
You'll experience both. And you will understand both. You'll know ways to elevate and take Bahamian and regional cuisine to the next level. But I also want you to understand the fundamental part of it so that you get the soul of it. And once you get the soul of it, then that changes, one, the narrative, and it also changes the taste and experience. If you think about it, me personally, I could be wrong, but I've never, ever had a bad plate of food that had soul behind it, that had a story behind it, that had some sort of person who was not just cooking food, but telling a story with the ingredients and the way that they were preparing the food, etc. I never had a bad plate of that.
Ever.
But I had some funky molecular gastronomy, this and that. You ain't never see the chef. The chef has come around 4 times a year kind of food. I had plenty of them. They was awful. So, we need to be able to understand that. I did a post the other day with this lady that I tracked down, and she's literally making one of our most famous dishes outside over a rock barrel stove in her backyard. And when I found the video, I was so intrigued. I reached out to the person that put it online. And if you see the comments that this lady has gotten, it's far beyond. Anytime I post some sort of fancy version of the dish. Right. You understand what I'm saying? So it's not like the opportunity is in there, but it's going to take persons like myself. It's going to take people not being, I think this is a comfortable space to put this in, but for a long time, especially Black people, some of us were ashamed of our food.
Yes,
some of the chefs were, kind of embarrassed, because a lot of our foods are stewy, a lot of our foods are wet, a lot of our foods are long cooked, slow cooked foods, so they don't present the same way some sort of sous vide, medium rare something, presents.
Yeah.
But so, instead of putting that to the forefront, we put it to the side. And it's going to take people, not just in this moment, but this moment and beyond, to continue to push that and be proud of it. And not just for it to be something that is seasonal, but something that is long-term and enduring, because who else can do it if we don't do it, if I don't do it? I'm more interested in a Bahamian-centric concept than I am in any other kind of restaurant. The other day I was talking to somebody and they wanted me to come in and do a sushi concept. And I said, me? I don't know nothing about no sushi. I can't help you with that because I can't connect it. I can't connect it. I could make it, but I won't be able to connect to it. I don't have a story to tell you about making sushi. I could learn it. I could make it probably very, very well, But all I could do is drop that on the plate and say, I learned this on YouTube. That ain't interesting.
Yeah.
But if you tell me to make regional food, oh, well, let's go. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Chef Leanne Martin is on here, and she's somebody you should be. I don't know if you all are connected, but you all should be talking as well. She's from Trinidad, and she's somebody who I think of as she's been talking about for a long time about this necessity for specificity and the sort of power in specificity that it becomes like your superpower, right? Like this sense that we should be thinking more complexly, we should be thinking more critically about the sort of regional specificity of these islands. And I guess I'm wondering, because I'm doing some work now with African restaurant, and the folks there it's been around for about 8 years, and they started just kind of trying to, just to your point, the same idea around these African restaurants that are existing in these spaces that are thriving. I mean, African restaurants in this country have, multiple times the staying power of most restaurants. Talk about the failure rate being like 2 to 5 years. The restaurants that usually participate in African Restaurant Week have like 10, 15, 20 years in the game. And so there's power in that, but sort of the formulation of African Restaurant Week was around highlighting these restaurants that were hidden in plain sight, people may not have known about. And so we're doing these series of conversations, and I'm curating these panels that are, I'm mentioning this because I'm going to hit you up to be on one, but this conversation around this really fully diasporic conversation that you can't talk about the continent without talking about the Caribbean, without talking about the U.S., and without talking about the rest of the globe, but that it's about sort of tracking and being rigorous about tracking these origin stories, right? Like you talked about, the Bahamas as it relates to Charleston, as it relates to Senegal, so you make these connections in a way that gives us all best practices and best source material to be rigorous in our work. But I guess I'm wondering about what that looks like for, because again, like I asked Chef Binta, she does Fulani cuisine out of Ghana. She's thinking a lot about translating this sort of nomadic culinary practice into like a fine dining pop-up space. And I'm wondering about translation. Your point about the stewiness, the sort of cultural specificity, the tactile nature of some of these cuisines, or the specificity in these, in the rural life, in the not in the otherness that is typically what makes people, I guess, the thing you talked about in terms of shame or deference. I'm wondering about what that looks like in terms of translating those experiences to gastronomic spaces. I mean, you at Four Seasons, your work in the Bahamas, I'm sure was very tied to, very fine dining, very particular setting. And how do you do that work of translating when those spaces aren't necessarily built for it?
Well, again, I've studied the roots. I've studied the foundation. And even when I was in culinary school some 20 odd years ago, I was always one of those that challenged what seemed to be the norm.
Yeah.
There were some things that I looked at and I was like, I don't know about that. That doesn't seem to be fundamentally correct. I believe if we do it this way, we still get the essence. We still can deliver the experience, but we can make it in a way that doesn't water down the experience, but enhances it. See, that's one of the issues that I have, which is when you see ethnic restaurants, ethnic cuisine, it's always watered down to make other people comfortable. And I have a problem with the word comfort anyhow. It's the most uncomfortable thing to me is comfort. And so we need to look at ways to make sure that our story is told in a way that keeps it relevant in the spaces that we're in. If you want me to prepare you a down-home Bahamian cuisine, you can get that. If you want me to prepare you a Michelin-level Bahamian cuisine, you can get that. Because I'm taking all of that from the same space. It comes from the same space. And it's going to be my creativity that's going to be able to bring that to you. And that's where we are tasked as professionals. But don't ask me to make my food for you to be able to be comfortable in what it's supposed to be in your mind. Somebody who don't know the cuisine, because I'm not going to do that. Don't ask me to make something spicy and make it mild. I don't know how to do that. There's no mild if the dish doesn't talk about mild. You know what I mean? And so I'm going to be able to give you that experience, whichever level it needs to be at. You know what I mean? Because I'm taking both of those from the same space, from the same foundation. And so for me, it's just a level of interpretation and creativity. Because I think if you call yourself a chef, you should be able to do that, and to do that in a way that you're not ashamed, or you don't feel like you've watered it down to a way that, you know, it's not going to connect. Here's the thing. Some of my food, my grandmother would be absolutely proud of. Some of my food, my grandmother wouldn't recognize visually. But taste and story-wise, she still know what it is.
Yep.
You see what I'm saying? And so that's how we're going to be able, as Black chefs, as chefs from the Caribbean, to walk in the same doors that everybody else is walking into. Once we're able to create and move our food in a certain direction, I don't see why not.
Yeah. Do you think it all about about publishing? I think about the cuisines that get product placed on the bookshelves, so that we have the sort of base material, sort of I don't know, sort of scholarship to allow folks to be rigorous outside of the visceral particularity of being in place. Like, right, if you're not physically in the Caribbean, or you're not in communities that are as like holistically rooted, it's probably tricky to really know those tastes and sort of learn those tastes in a way that, I don't know, I think in practice makes the dishes better from a practical standpoint. And so I'm wondering about the lack of real Caribbean cookbooks and scholarship around the Caribbean. Because I think I think for me at least, the rigor that I was able to develop really was only benefited from the moment, right? Like the last decade or so in publishing has given us the words, right? Like has given us a sort of context to be able to think more broadly about Blackness in gastronomy. And so I'm wondering about what that looks like for the Caribbean, because your point about all of the regional specificity is interesting, but I think that I don't know, I'm wondering about how serious you think media, publisher, et cetera, are about that kind of intellectual rigor, because it was going to take a lot more investment of just, there's one thing to cover the homogenous Caribbean is a lot sexier and a lot easier a shorthand than expecting there to be more complexity, I guess.
Well, you know, there's two ways I'm going to answer that, especially because I'm in the middle of writing my first cookbook.
Okay.
So, you know, you're right in saying that we have been all kind of looped together, and there aren't enough people, modern day griots in our region.
Yeah.
And that's something definitely, you know, I'm working now towards not just writing a cookbook, but also encouraging other chefs to write a cookbook as well. I'm not just getting the information and keeping it for myself. I'm making it readily available for more people as well. So that's one of the things that I think that we need to do. We definitely need to put down recipes, stories, etc., so that that word can pass on. Yeah. And then the sad thing is, I think when you talk about Black food and you talk about Bahamian food, for example, Shark Week was just shot in the Bahamas. The one with Mike Tyson and the one with Will Smith. There's so many non-food related things that happen in the Bahamas where I think we already have the eye on us. So we just need to tap into it a little bit more.
Okay.
It's already there. Where the Bahamas itself is already a brand. The Caribbean is a brand, and the major islands within the Caribbean are brands. And so what we need to now do is to take that momentum and place it where we need it to be. Simply put, you know, when these people come into town, and I need to be the persons that cater to them, need to give them the experience and open their eyes up to the opportunities beyond. Hey, you know, well, we shot Shark Week down there. Why not let's do a culinary show down there as well?
Right.
And as you look at, you know, what's going on in your modern day food magazines, a lot of people are traveling into the Caribbean.
Yes.
And the stories have changed. The stories have gone from that sort of bland overview to going into houses, to getting parents involved into the stories and all these different stuff. If you look over the last 6 months, look at most of the stories that highlighted areas in the Caribbean.
Yeah.
They were very, very connected to what we've been talking about all along.
Yeah.
There's one thing to go to Jamaica and have jerk chicken in a hotel versus having it at Scotty's. Totally different. Right. There's one thing going to the Bahamas and having conch salad in a hotel and having conch salad on the dock. Because somebody like me will tell you, I don't make conch salad in hotels. If anybody asks me to make a conch salad on a menu, you can forget about it. It's not going to happen. I'm going to fight you tooth and nail for that because that is an overall experience to me. You talk to anybody that has ever been to the Bahamas and connected with me, how I introduce them to the dish, to the experience. You know what I mean? That's a cold beer. That's somewhere on the dock. That's somewhere where people are talking very locally. And then you get the dish. You understand? Right. And all of that comes and puts it together. And that is what I would want to see if we were introducing conch salad to the world. You can't shoot conch salad in a hotel and put it in a magazine. That's not conch salad. You know what I mean? Right. And so all of that needs to be what I said earlier, we need to have a level of pride in what it is that we're doing and we're pushing forward so that you understand it. You know what I mean? Most people had roti when they went to Trinidad. But you ask the chef on here, what is real roti? What that mean? What that experience is for her and what it is she would tell the world if she was given the opportunity to tell that story. And so that's what we need to do, and that's what we need to push. And we also need to set up ourselves as individual chefs and ambassadors so that people will stop and listen to what it is that we want to say. We need to present ourselves at a level that people will say, okay, let's take him seriously. A lot of times that's a part of the conversation that we don't want to talk about. You know what I mean? We don't have ourselves packaged in a way that people will come and say, okay, let's listen to that guy. Because I know that guy. We know enough about him, and what he's projecting is on the level that we want to see anywhere we go, and so we qualify. We don't just get a pass because of who we are and where we are or how we look. But that's part of the conversation that we don't want to have. You can't be mediocre and want to be on the top. And that's something that we definitely need to be ready for.
Yes.
And be pushing, so when the opportunity comes, you don't have to scrungy run. And we'd like to scrungy run.
Well, it goes back to the point you made about the any plate of food you have that's rooted is automatically going to be dope. And it's a sense that, like, technically, I think we defer. We give a lot of grace to like professional and technical excellence, and a lot of times it's not tested on like larger scales. But I think something in a sense of self first and sort of a rigor about your technique. Those things, if you are constantly working without eyes on you, prepare, like, make, to your point, make you ready so you don't have to get ready. But I also love this. I was asking all those things earlier just because I just wanted to hear you say the words about, really about the responsibility we have. I think sometimes I don't know, as we all get older, I've been thinking a lot about intergenerational conversation. I'm thinking a lot about these elders who were doing this work in times and in spaces that were not as gracious or open, or the sort of, like, I wasn't as curious about gastronomy in the way that it is now. We benefit from the moment, right? We benefit from a really particular culinary imagination. And so that comes with it, in my opinion, a kind of responsibility for stewardship. And this, everything you said so far, to my mind, has really just been about, not ownership is a really particular word too, but really about honoring the places from which we come, right? Like, it doesn't have to look like one thing. It doesn't have to. It's not policed by anybody. It doesn't define it for anyone else. You have to, whatever culture you come from. It feels like the most authentic work comes from when people are clear about their origin, right? Clear about the framework from which they cook. Because you can taste inauthenticity. You can taste the lack of clarity. I would love it, because we're doing really good on time. And for those of y'all who have jumped in and out and maybe just joining us, I'm talking with Chef Simeon Hall. You're in Hawaii right now, right?
Yes.
Yes, but by way of the Bahamas. He's been dropping many, many gems about just the specificity of the Bahamas, but also rigorousness in the Caribbean. And I would love it if you could talk a little bit about some of the experiences that you curated. Specifically, there's one called Ignite that was really dope last year. But just this notion around sort of culinary ambassadorship and this sort of necessity for chefs to take on the role of ambassadors, I think it's really it's a really particular, like, posture with which you do your work, because it forces you, or sort of, not forces is the wrong word too, but it kind of it enters you into spaces globally that allow you to have broader conversations around culture that I don't think that there are many other opportunities for.
Yeah, force is a good word, because, I feel responsible to do my part. I really do. Both my grandmothers were chefs. One owned a very, very popular restaurant. One of the first Black women in the Bahamas to own a business, and especially thrive in an area that was underdeveloped at the time.
Okay.
The real estate now is almost quadruple its value since she was there. You can't own anything in the area that she was at. And the next one was at a very, very popular hotel all her life. All her professional life, she worked as a culinary in this resort. And so coming up under that sort of framework, made me feel responsible to take the baton and continue the work that they started. I remember, working with my grandmother, in particular the one that owned the restaurant, and seeing and feeling and understanding what food was and did for people, and also seeing what she was able to achieve, made me again feel responsible to carry that on, not just to be another chef in the industry, but to be somebody wherever I go. It's about the storytelling, not just of my food, but wherever I am. Yeah. It's the same thing here in Hawaii. I mean, I come here, and although there is definitely the undertone of Caribbean and Bahamian in my cuisine, the overtone is, let's cook some Hawaiian food. Let's not be embarrassed about what it is Hawaiian culture is and represents to this area. Let's not, not hire leading Hawaiian chefs and put them inside our business. You know what I mean? So the fight continues. Wherever I go, it's the same fight. And it's usually that I'm drawn to the same area. And so, you know, being on an island where that continues, where people are being marginalized for the benefit of people being comfortable, has always been a fight. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, you know, you come here and you ask me to make a poke bowl, or you ask one of the other chefs who is not from the area to make a poke bowl, and you get something that makes the local upset. You know what I mean? So it now takes me to say, hey, let's go with the local version, because this is the version that the world wants. People, for example, when you hear the word Hawaiian pizza, you want to get a Hawaiian mad, ask them to make a Hawaiian pizza.
Yeah.
You want to get any Hawaiian culinary absolutely furious, ask them to make a Hawaiian pizza. It ain't gonna happen. I think they'll walk off the job before they make a Hawaiian pizza. You know what I mean? Because it's almost an insult to what they believe and what they do.
Yeah.
And so when you have persons like myself embracing that, I'm not just saying, okay, well, you know, I'm from the Bahamas and, you know, I know about Hawaiian pizza. And all my life I know about Hawaiian pizza. I even made Hawaiian pizza. No, I come here and I say, okay, no more Hawaiian pizza.
That's right.
Because it's not Hawaiian. You know what I mean? So, so those are the kind of things that I absolutely embrace and always push wherever I go.
So we got about, we're doing really good in time. We got about 15 minutes left or so. And I want to leave room if people have questions, because this has been so good so far. But I don't know, I feel like I want to talk a little bit more about that, because I'm interested in, again, like I'm having these conversations globally, right? And so right now in the UK, there's this really particular movement around this emergence of Black history as necessity, because it's not really a foundational, like, it's not foundational to Black folks in the UK. And there's almost, it's fascinating because there seems to be, because Blackness, like diasporic Blackness in the UK is so much of immigrant story. The communities that exist there, like the Caribbean specificity, the specificity in terms of African countries, there are these very particular and intact bubbles of cultural preservation that happen. And so they're almost on doing the reverses to what's happening here in the US, where we have this kind of collective Blackness, this collective, you know, cultural foundation, and there's this constant search for American chefs, I think, to reclaim specificity. I'm wondering about, because I mean, again, like you are from the Bahamas, and you grew up with this really long legacy of receipts, right? Like cultural receipts, professional receipts. I'm wondering about, because again, back to the conversation we were having around the power of tourism, there seems to be something really particular about the Caribbean and places like Hawaii, where a large part of the ways in which your country works, this is a side note, but like Tortola was mind blowing for me. This is my first time sort of experiencing different countries in the Caribbean. But Tortola was particular because it wasn't a tourist island, and it wasn't beholden to tourist gaze. I mean, even the vernacular of belongers, and the fact that island was so, it's like 80% belonger owned, in the sense of peace and preservation and like clarity, was mind blowing, because it was a very particular kind of way to be Black, a particular way to center who you really are as like a national identity. I think that so much of our life in the US and UK might be in search of that kind of autonomy. And guess I'm wondering, you thinking about the work you do as such a rooted Bahamian chef, going to a place like Hawaii where you might have had an expectation, but you're seeing, I'm sure, a very similar kind of diffusion of culture. I'm wondering about what Hawaiian chefs are teaching you about that reclamation. Are they there yet? Are they thinking in the same ways? Because I'm also thinking a lot about cross-cultural solidarity, right? Like if we have this conversation about the Caribbean issue, we also have it about like this, you Asian islands. Like, I think that there's got to be similar conversations around any place that tourism and sort of culture is tourism has to have that same kind of conversation. So I'm wondering about the awakening you said. The gems you dropped for Hawaiian chefs, and are they there yet?
Well, your point is spot on in saying and understanding that the story is global. The narrative is global. The effects of tourism are global.
Yeah.
And so definitely that is something that is a huge conversation to be had.
Yeah.
It's ongoing, and it's something that I was surprised actually to know and to come into this space and realize the similarities between what I left and what I'm now involved in. And knowing that the root of it is tourism. You know what I mean? Hawaii is the #1 destination for Japanese tourists in the world. In the world.
Interesting.
And so what does that mean? There is more components of Japanese culture in food and hospitality and lifestyle in Hawaii than there is Hawaiian. You could find Japanese food easier than you can find Hawaiian food. And to me,
that's a problem.
Something ain't right with that.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? Especially, and here's one of the key points that I want to make. And I'm going to say this as best as I can say it. The biggest problem I have is the tourists force us to change in a way that they would never change for us.
Say that part.
You understand?
Yeah.
You understand?
Yeah.
So for me, that has always been a prick. That has always been a thorn for me personally. Nobody in the world more rigid than Japanese. They are very rigid people. That's not insulting to their culture at all. That's who they are. You can't find Hawaiian cuisine over there. But 9 out of 10 places here, the menu is in Japanese. The food is Japanese centric. The service is Japanese centric. The hosts speak Japanese. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And for me, that's the issue.
Yeah.
I had a question in one of our meetings where we were learning a Japanese word every time we had a meeting, right? So my question was, why aren't we learning a Hawaiian word? If we learn one Japanese word, we should be taught 3 Hawaiian words.
Okay. Yeah.
But of course, for whatever reason, I wasn't invited to too much more than a meeting. But that's my point. And I'll always be that person. I'm unapologetic about it because I feel that is a valid point.
Yeah.
But that is what we are always faced with when it comes to this sleeping devil giant called tourism.
Yeah.
It is a bittersweet anything for everybody. Do you know one of the reasons that Fidel Castro was put on the blacklist and had maintained his own kind of community in Cuba? Because he refused to advance American tourism. He refused to advance American tourism. He refused to allow American brands to overtake local brands. And you see what happened to him.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so when you think about how deep the demand and what they do for that goes, it's chilling. But for me, I always had an issue. In fact, one of the last things I'll say is I did something purposefully several years ago when I was in Italy. And I had just had this experience with an Italian who was asking me to make authentic Italian pastas and food in the Bahamas. And I said, well, Yeah, I know. You must need to make that for me and you, because ain't nothing Italian about me. So when I went to Italy, I asked them for some Bahamian food. And nobody even knew what I was talking about. And that was my point to myself. But that's what tourism does. Tourism puts you in the position where you have to compromise. You have to adjust. And in most cases, especially unfortunately with the American tourist market, they want to feel more of what they have rather than exploring what is available in those places. Right. And ergo, you see the changes. But hopefully, as travel changes from a tourist to a traveler, which is a huge difference, we will see more people seeking out the authentic events. In fact, my event, Ignite, last year, we had 15 tourists come to the event. Just through social media and hearing about it, etc., they came to the event and they absolutely enjoyed it. And so hopefully as things change and we get out of it and things improve, 2021 we'll see an amazing Ignite event. Amazing Ignite. So we're going to continue with the story. We're going to continue with pushing, finishing my cookbook and all that stuff. There's some stuff that I'm going to go back to the Bahamas to complete, because there's no way I'm not going to complete my cookbook in the Bahamas. That's right. Just for my own sense of purpose, I have to do that home. So I'm going back home to finish the cookbook. I'm going back home to plan Ignite. I'm going back home to who knows what tomorrow holds. But definitely home is going to see more of me in the future, for sure.
That's right. That's right. All right, so that feels like a perfect place to end, and I want to, if anybody really quickly wants to put any questions if they have them. But tell people where they can reach you. I know Simeon Hall, things at junior.com. They can definitely go to your website, can follow you here on socials. You know, I feel like you sort of summed it up. The book is next, and, you know, sort of getting through Rona. This is a conversation we'll have offline, but I'm just interested in sort of your point about the positive, like the sort of hopefulness of the shift in tourism over the next 2-3 years is dope and is absolutely doable. But I wonder about post-corona, right? Like this notion about the ways in which this moment has certainly shifted and changed how tourism has to operate. I'm wondering if part of that is not, if that's not some small bits of positivity coming out of this as well, because I think there's something to recalibrating in the posture with which folks are doing the work they do, right? You can't to put the onus on tourism and tourists so to change their posture is a lot. But if you change the posture with which you're inviting people to where you're from, I think that might do a much better job. And I think it would take a moment like this where people have to really reckon with why they do the work they do and how they really want to show up professionally. That was going to be the greatest denominator. So I just appreciate you so much. I want to make sure we end with enough time for people to take a breath, because right after this, we got Jackie Summers in conversation. But I just want to thank you. This has been really dope. I feel like we didn't really get a chance to chat for real into October, and this has been really interesting to hear you in your own words be so dope.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing. I took away those two words. They've been really, really high on my list. Reckoning and recalibrate. Yeah. That's definitely what most people need to walk away from the corona thinking. And we need to also kind of discredit this idea of 2020 was a mistake. You know, it's not going to be erased from the history books.
Hello.
So we need to make sure that we understand and know and recalibrate and reckon all that we can from these experiences that have been also tragic, but also shine the light on a lot of different things that we are now charged with to get moving. So it's definitely something that, we can, try to make better out of it. And we owe it to everybody who has suffered and something has happened very, very tragic to them to make sure that something comes out of this. And so hopefully we see a sort of change in the direction that makes the movement for this generation. Because the last thing I'll say, which is something that I hold on to, is that we're tomorrow's ancestors.
That's it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And so what we do now is very, very important.
Yeah. Oh, such a good way to end. I appreciate you. We will be talking. I'm going to email you about this African restaurant wing situation because it's going to be very interesting.
Awesome.
But, thank you so much, and please follow.
Thank you so much too. I really appreciate it. I really, really appreciate it.
Yes. All righty.
All right. Take care.
See you.
All right. Take care.
All right, y'all. That was so dope. Yeah. So just follow Simeon here on socials. Please go to his website. His book is forthcoming. And he's just, I don't know, I think that there's got to be just more rigor, more specificity. So check him out, check out his site, and stay tuned. Take a little breath, but at 4 o'clock, the brilliant Jackie Summers is back with rum expert Zan Kong. So absolutely. See y'all later.